I did cast pretty much all of the tournament. I think almost all of it, at least starting with the group stage. So do want to talk about it and just sort of how it's going to fit into the overall AoE2 tournament scene, what are the big takeaways. So I'm going to start with the results of the tournament, go through all the major storylines as far as players and teams and whatnot. So yeah, spoiler alert. And then I'm going to go through the Age of Empires 2 stuff, the sort of actual in-game metagame that we saw develop throughout the tournament. And then I'm going to go on to talk about what I call the community meta, which is essentially all of the drama and the sort of more community esportsy takeaways that we can have from Two Pools. So obviously, Two Pools is Lidacor's first S-tier tournament, and I think it was definitely a success for him, so big congratulations to him for that. Obviously, he's been working really hard, and he's my good friend, so very much well-deserved, and let's just get into those results. Alright, so I've arrived on the other side of the screen, as I have the Wikipedia page open for Two Pools. So as you can see, Tempo Storm did end up winning over Suomi in the finals 5-2. Pretty dominant performance from Tempo Storm for this tournament. That is, of course, Hera and Leary. I think they probably were the favorites going into it just because they are together, two tippy top players. But yeah, I mean, they looked pretty good, and I think it kind of speaks to the format also favoring them. First, you have the meta in 2v2s being very sort of ironclad in what you're supposed to go for, and I'll talk more about this later, but I think that definitely favors them, Leary being the super good archer player, Hera being the super good cav player. And then you had a lot of hybrid maps, in the map pool. We saw a lot of Cape of Storms, Coast to Mountain, fair amount of Kawasan, and Forest Pond, and Team Acropolis. Team Islands. Yeah, that one. So, yeah, definitely very, very strong performance from them. They didn't really face a whole lot of opposition, I would say. Not that they didn't face very good teams, but they weren't really pushed to the limit. And notably, they never ran into WWP, so Yo and Lix, or any of the Gamer Legion teams. Personally, I think that Tempo Storm would have beaten all of those teams anyway, but it is still worth mentioning. So obviously, congratulations to Hera and Leary for that one. That's another S-tier tournament under their belt. Suomi, of course, being the second place, the runner-up. And they, I think surprised a lot of people. Suomi, you're getting your Suomi stock. It's definitely on the downtrend in recent tournaments, I guess, especially for team game events. You kind of expect them to perform a little bit better. But right here, the Max and Valessa showing that they are still very much there. They are both incredibly strong players. Their team coordination is great. Again, they are very good on hybrid maps. And this is a tournament that had a lot of them. Personally, the series of the tournament for me was Suomi versus WWP. I think that it was incredibly close, and it was just super, super high level between both teams, and it was a real joy to cast. But of course, speaking of that, WWP, Yo and Lix, another strong performance, but not a win. They did win the last 2v2 event, 2v2 World Cup, but still almost making it to the finals. It's, they might be disappointed, but it's certainly not a bad result. Same with AM, Nikov, and MBL definitely showing some strong results. They did eke out a win over Miguel and Dogao, and then they eked out a win over Doubt and Slam. Gamer Legion A, I guess, would be one of the other big stories, in that they breezed through their group more than any other team, even Tempo Storm. They didn't drop a single game, and then they kind of just had a really off day against Suomi. It wasn't the Viper and Tato that we're used to seeing in a lot of situations. So that was a little unfortunate for them. But they looked a little sloppy and Suomi didn't, and obviously it's all about who can perform, when it matters. Not a great result, I would say, for Viper and Tato. They're probably a little disappointed in that, but, go get them next time, champs. And I think the last thing I really want to talk about in terms of, storylines for players and whatnot, so this tournament, the way it's formatted and structured is you had 8 invited teams, and you had 8 qualified teams. If you look at the group stage, the 8 teams that advanced, all of the invited teams. The 8 teams that got knocked out, all of the qualifier teams. And to be honest, it wasn't really all that close. It was pretty decisive that, okay, these are the teams, the top 2 teams, then the bottom 2 teams. The only exception was Sol's, who I think most people would say, okay, they're probably the number 1 up-and-coming team. Vinchester Dark Classic Pro did have some strong results. They did manage to beat Doubt and Slam, 3-2 in their opening set, barely lost to WWP, but then unfortunately kind of couldn't really make it happen again versus Doubt and Slam in their rematch. So a little bit unfortunate for them, But that was really about as close as we got. VNSB had some okay-ish performances, but so did Nilly and Jordan initially against VNA, but then they kind of fell off during their rematch. The top teams are, I think, just a step above everyone else right now. And unfortunately, that means a lot of the earlier rounds of these tournaments, there's not a lot of room for upsets, unfortunately. The closest thing we got was Sauls, but I would say that Sauls was probably like the number 9 team. So it wouldn't be like a super huge upset for them. But still, I'm very interested to see how they're going to be performing in the future, especially in a 3v3 event like the World Desert Championship. Because that'll have, you have Vinchester Dark and Classic Pro all able to play together at the same time, and I'd be really interested to see how that sort of dynamic works with those players, so we'll definitely be keeping an eye out on that. But I think that's going to be it for, I guess, the big stories as far as teams go. Nothing, I guess, too wildly unexpected, but still plenty of interesting sets and some really well-fought close series throughout this tournament. A lot of blowouts, but there were some very memorable sets. But now, let's go ahead and talk about the actual AoE2 stuff. So the 2 pools meta. In case you need a reminder, the whole gimmick for this tournament is that you draft half of your civs, and then your opponent drafts half of your civs. So, like, in every single game, you are playing a civ that from the pool that you pick, and a civ from the pool that your opponents picked. Obviously, that more or less means you're playing with one good civ and one bad civ, and it's up to you. It's up to each team how they want to use the civilizations. And I guess that brings me to the first point, archers greater than cav. And when I say that, we saw this initially in World Cup 2v2, this trend where it goes away from the cavalry player doing like the carrying to more of the archer player. And I would say that was very much the case here in 2 pools, and it just kind of furthered that whole trend that we've been seeing. The teams, with some exceptions, the top teams tended to prioritize using their good civ as the archer civ. So we're talking trying to get Chinese, trying to get Mayans, trying to get Ethiopians, Vietnamese, and Britons. How could I forget Britons? Britons are insane. So yeah, those are, like, having super strong archer civs is even more important than having super strong cav civs. And the reason for that is that, okay, you have the meta right now. You have 1 archer player and 1 cav player. It's pretty darn ironclad for 2v2s. So if you have the 2 teams fight, each team has 1 guy with an archers, blob of archers and a blob of knights or camels or whatever. The meta is actually to the point when you have the cavalry players just running back and forth, like they're just dancing back and forth, not even attacking, just because they're trying to absorb all of the arrow fire that they can before they meet their untimely demise. And it's like all about the archer player just like churning out as many archers as humanly possible. It's a little sad to watch, to be honest, but it is what it is, and it's something that I guess was very notable as far as like the development of how the top teams think that 2v2 is what they think is the optimal strategy. There we go. And I guess that kind of brings us to meta versus civ. In 2 pools, we saw a lot of civ variety. That's kind of the whole nature of the beast. But I was a little disappointed that we saw civs that weren't well suited to going for the meta anyway. Like, players felt that, you know what, the meta is too important, it's too rigid, that even if we're goths and we need a guy going cav, we're going to have the goth player go cavalry. And, if they're up against Berbers, then, well, let's just try and make it work. And it rarely ever worked. We saw Turks going for mass crossbowmen. We saw Sicilians having to go for a ton of archers. And it just, those sorts of plays never really felt that great, and I kind of wish that teams would maybe experiment a little bit more with, like, maybe trying to use their weaker civs to the civ's strength, right? Like, every civ has at least something it does well, unless you're Sicilians, feels bad, man. But every other civ has something they can do well. And yeah, I kind of wish we saw that a little bit more. We did see some variety, but it wasn't really a ton, I would say. And that's just kind of the nature of especially open and hybrid maps in 2v2s. Map popularity. So 2 pools here. I'll bring back up the maps here. Here they are. We really did see... Okay, so Arabia was game number 1, and then it was, loser picks their home map. Pretty straightforward. We saw a lot of the same maps. And those maps tended to have fairly set metas. With the exception of Forest Pond. To me, Forest Pond was kind of the breakout map of the tournament. I feel like, especially for 2v2s and maybe even larger team games, it's really interesting because there was no consensus reached on, okay, do we super focus on water? Do we just kind of half-heartedly go for water and then try and go for like a big mid-game land aggression? Do we try and boom, unique units? All that sort of thing I think was actually kind of interesting with the map. But we saw a lot of Cape of Storms, a lot of Coast to Mountain, some good games on these maps, but Kawasan I don't think really had any amazing games. RF had some okay games. We never saw Rock Slide. We never saw Hideout. Natsukosha was barely seen. Team Islands it can have some really good games. There were really good Team Islands games. There were also the Team Island games where nothing happened for 2 hours and it made me want to smash my head into my keyboard. So yeah, it's kind of unfortunate with how water maps are in terms of their meta, but that's a whole different can of worms as far as the topic goes. I guess the only thing I would say here is that if you have a map pool, I would really like it if every single map could get featured as much as possible, at least as much as you can force players to do so. So I think not for every tournament, but I think having more set maps might be an interesting way of going about it. So the teams know ahead of time what maps they need to prepare for, but that way you can sort of okay, this week we're doing Cape of Storms, Forest Pond, and Natsukotra, and then next week we're doing Eruption, Hideout, and Team Islands or something like that. I think it's something that's worth considering, in my opinion. Something that was very much the case in the original two pools is you had the civs that were the good civs, and then the civs that you just gave out as quickly as possible. So your Turks, Goths, Saracens, probably some other ones I'm forgetting. Maybe Vietnamese hadn't been buffed yet back then, or Khmer or something like that. That was not the case this time around as much. Yeah, sure, there were civs that were, prioritized in Pool A, and civs that were, given away quickly. But there were a lot of games where you couldn't tell which was the good civ and which was the bad civ. And I think that speaks really well to the game's balance. And as the game gets more and more balanced, I think that the whole format and concept of two pools actually becomes even more compelling to, strategize about and watch and all that stuff. Of course, I have Sicilians and Burgundians there because they are the big asterisks. So yeah, I mean, Sicilians and Burgundians, they were gotten rid of as quickly as possible. Either they were banned or they were just, given away as quickly as possible. And Burgundians, at least, they seem to have some sort of niche application. They never, shine as a civ as OMG, the civ is amazing. But they still can have powerful options on closed maps. In the sorts of situations on Natsukotra, where you're walling up a lot, on RF, or maybe even Team Acropolis, where you can be more defended early on. Burgundians, they can afford to get those eco upgrades earlier, and then you can have a very strong eco, and then you can, use your paladin timing and all that stuff. It's not a disaster of a civ in certain situations, so long as you can play on a more closed map. Sicilians, they felt bad. They felt really bad, to be honest. They didn't shine anywhere, except, they were the least bad on Team Islands, in my opinion, because they do have some decent landing potential, and they have a decent navy, and the farm bonus, I guess, can sustain a lot of light cav in late game or something like that, but yeah. Obviously, both of the new civs are getting buffs in the near future. Actually, if it's an April patch, I'm recording this on the 27th, so it should be in the next few days. And I do have a video where I go through all of the changes in the upcoming patch based on what I found in the pup update thingy. So definitely I'll try to remember and put that in the description thingy. So check that out if you haven't. But other than that, I think, okay, yeah, Sicilians and Burgundians, they're not the greatest civs in the world. They're the new civs, whatever. But I think the bigger takeaway even is everybody else is actually fairly balanced. I had people watching my stream, super surprised that, why are Slavs in the pool 2 or whatever? Slavs are a good civ. Why are they, a bad civ? And it's well, yeah, Slavs are a good civ. Malay are a good civ. Bulgarians are a good civ, although they didn't really have great results in this tournament. But still, and it just speaks to the balance of the game being better and better and better as much as people complain. But lastly, we do have a lovely spreadsheet from Nerfox, so let's go over to that. My beautiful face was blocking the way, so we got rid of that. Now, I know I can be bogged down and talk about this for a very long time, so I'll just try and keep this brief to the big highlights. One, Chinese and Mayans, super strong win rates. Well, I guess Mayans were 7 and 5, or no, 9 and 5. I was that's better than that. Yeah, 9 and 5 for Mayans, 17 and 6 for Chinese. Having those good archer civs, really, really does make a difference. You can see that in the bans as well. Britain's banned 6 times, Mayans banned 9 times. So that was definitely very noticeable. Persians, not the greatest performance. Bulgarians, a dreadful performance. But that I don't necessarily think that it speaks to like the weaknesses of those civs, but maybe that the Cav civs maybe need to be played a little bit differently to be successful, I suppose. Like, especially Bulgarians, I remember there being several instances where players would just stick on Stirrup Cavalier even into, like, Paladins, and that, like, you're not going to win by doing that. You need to switch into Konniks. Like, yes, Konniks are worse against archers, but if you're in, like, you know, big pitched battles where, like, there are a lot of halbs, too, the Konniks are going to be performing much more, much better there, and are going to be at least competitive against the Paladins. Spanish, I have no idea why their win rate was so good. Unfortunately, we don't have the breakdown by maps, but Spanish, I think, were pretty strong on Forest Pond, and they can also be, a decent pick on maps like Regicide Fortress and Team Acropolis. You know, people say Spanish are bad. Spanish aren't bad. They're just not good on 1v1 Arabia. Like, they're actually really good in a ton of other settings. It's just not 1v1 Arabia. Then you had Japanese, who I think just were so incredibly strong on the hybrid maps, 8 and 4. Good win rate for them, obviously. Cumans really don't fit well into the 2v2 meta. 3 and 9 with these guys, and they never looked good. Like, I saw so many times, like, players just not build the second TC in Feudal Age because the meta is just too aggressive for that. They're not insane for doing that. Like, the players aren't insane for doing that. It's just, the Civ doesn't, like, if you can't go for that specific strategy, the Civ isn't very good. And maybe that is something that needs to be addressed in the future. Other Civs kind of had some really weird, like, bad win rates, like Koreans, I think, playing on islands didn't have the greatest job. Vietnamese, for some reason, had a really bad performance. But again, this isn't a very large sample size. But, you know, there are just a few little interesting things I think we can take away from this. But that is pretty much what I wanted to talk about with as far as like the two pools meta. I guess I'll just wrap up this part by saying that 2v2s can provide some of the best Age of Empires to watch and also some of the worst. To me, 2v2 is, as a format, is at its worst when you're playing on open maps in like early to mid game. When you're in that situation where you're just like only making archers and only making cavalry, and it's just about snowballing some early to mid game advantage, like that is a really, really stale experience to watch, and it's not very fun to watch. I can't imagine it's all that fun to play either. I mean, I personally don't enjoy it, but I don't know, maybe some people do. But if you can get 2v2s into those more weird situations, like on your forest ponds or regicide fortresses, or something like that, something that's Team Acropolis as well, I feel like those maps can create a lot more compelling an experience because you're not just doing the same thing over and over again necessarily. Like, yeah, sure, you'll have like metas and stuff like that, but, you know, variety is the spice of life, right? And the thing with 2v2s is that because there's only two of you, as the game goes longer, you're forced to expand out into a lot more of your tech tree than you are in, you know, the larger team games because you just don't have as many people to cover your weaknesses, right? So I think that can lead to some really interesting scenarios, and we did see that play throughout this tournament, which it would be good to see that part of 2v2 emphasized as much as possible, because otherwise it just isn't very exciting, in my opinion. But I guess that brings us to our final point, the community meta. Honestly, there's not too much to talk about here. There really wasn't that much drama, which is good. I don't like drama, man. But there was, of course, some stuff. Series and stream length. This wasn't really an issue until, like, the latest stages of the tournament, especially when you're looking at, like, 2v2s. For four best of fives in a day for 2v2s, it's too much. Like, it's too much to cast, it's too much to watch. If players were, you know, playing it live, it's too much to play. The best of seven semifinals, 2 in a day, that was a little rough, especially when the second semifinal had all of those tech issues, but we'll get to that in a second. And then the finals being a best of 9, I think that was... I don't think we need to go more than a best of 7 for 2v2s. And, like, that's just in the final. Like, you could probably even argue just best of 5s, but, I mean, okay, if you want a final, I think you can do best of 7s, but I don't think we need to do anything else, anything longer, I suppose. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like maybe limiting the amount of 12-hour days would be a good thing. Like, because you're running into the problem where, one, everyone's getting tired. Both in terms of viewers and casters, and then of course players if it's a live situation. But you also run into the time zone issues where as you get later on into the day, especially once you hit like 10 p.m. Central Europe time, then you can tell, like, the viewer count drops, like, for everybody. And I think that is something that we as a community should collectively try to avoid as much as possible. But, it's like you live and you learn. But we experienced it in Hidden Cup, and we experienced it in two pools, and I think it's just something that we, again, collectively should endeavor to work on. Restarts and crashes. I didn't even know the tournament had restarts until the live portion, because when you're doing Rex, which I guess I'll also talk about here, you don't see that, right? That's all Robo's job to sift through. But especially when the game is very unstable, which unfortunately it just is. It's just the reality of DE. Yeah, it really kills the flow of a broadcast. Like, in my opinion, I'm not talking about admin rees. Like, if there is a bugged map, then yes, it's just Age of Empires has random map scripts. Sometimes it craps out, and you just need to have the admin read. Like, that is fine. I'm talking about like player restarts, especially when it's like, oh, okay, well, we just don't like our map, or oh, I got lamed. Well, now I just kind of have to call a restart, and it slows everything down so much, and we just get that a lot with live games. It's just how people are, I suppose. I think that restarts are not a thing we need in Age of Empires 2 anymore. The maps are a lot more consistent in their generations in terms of being fair. I mean, I think it's to the point now when like the Team Islands map generations like have exactly the same amount of wood per island. We don't need restarts. It's adapting is a really important part of being a good Age of Empires player, at least again in my opinion. But then you have the crashing issue. Again, this isn't really something that nobody's going to feel good about this. If the restore feature doesn't work. And it seems like the restore feature never works when you need it to, which is really unfortunate. But crashes, I mean, obviously they can kill the broadcast's flow. There was a specific instance. It was the second semifinal, AM versus Tempo. I think it was like game 2. And in case you missed it, so AM was ahead of Tempo. They had lost the first game, but they were looking good in the second game. It wasn't like they were 100% going to win. During the stream, I gave it like a 65% chance for them to win the game when the game crashed. It was like 30 minutes or something into the game. So it was like a decent chunk into the game. And then they couldn't restore the wreck. That's bad. Because what happened is that Tempo did the exact one thing that could be done by anybody to avoid drama, and that is to voluntarily offer the admin win. That is the only thing that could have been done that, makes people feel less awful. No admin is going to feel comfortable like saying, okay, that game was a foregone conclusion, AM just get the win there, because it wasn't. Like, there's a difference between having an advantage in a game and then being like a shoe-in, and you can't do that reasonably. But also, if you just had to completely restart the map and then AM would lose it when they were having a nice advantage, like, that's also really bad. Again, it's more of a technical thing, and maybe you could establish super specific rules going forward, but I still think that we should try and take the best possible option out when we can. But obviously, props to Hera and Leary for that nice sign of sportsmanship, and yeah, they did the right thing in my opinion. And I guess just to briefly talk about Rex versus Live, in my opinion, Rex are way better than Live unless you're using the fact that the match is live for some reason. So like Mem in his events, like he likes to have the webcams for players, right? That is actually using there is a reason that you're using it, the live experience, right? So you can see the players' reactions. And of course, if you're having like interviews right after, so you want to have the interviews when the matches are still fresh in the players' minds, right? But other than that, if you're just like casting games, Rex are way better. Like, it is the difference in terms of how smooth the broadcast is just absolutely massive. And when you're having very long days to begin with, it's nice. Like, when in the most of the tournament, it was Rex. We did a really good job of just keeping the show rolling constantly. Okay, we end one game, we talk about it, we go into the next game, and then we go into the next game, and then after the series, we have like a 5 to 10 minute break, and then it helps pace the games very well. But that's just my 2 cents. Then new S tier event. Yeah, I mean, this is Lidacor's first S tier event. It is another event that we can just slot into the AoE 2 calendar. I think people liked watching it. It's a fun format, and players, I think, enjoyed playing it, and people seem to enjoy watching it. So I think it's great, because as much as I love the established events that we have in AoE 2 right now, I feel like there is very little room to have new ideas and new concepts that will actually get a lot of attention. And I'm glad that Lida was able to, secure that Microsoft sponsorship and all that stuff. I guess I should briefly talk about, when Lidacore is streaming, he doesn't have the most viewers, especially when T90 is streaming. I think that people who are upset by that, okay, sure, you can be upset by that, but that's just the way it is. It should be, I think, made very clear that not just for Lidacore in this particular instance, but for every tournament, the most important thing is how many eyeballs you have on the event, not how many eyeballs you have on the individual channel. Like Lidacore had a lot of success in terms of growing his overall viewer count or follower count. I think his follower count increased by 30% or something like that. That's massive. And when he was streaming, he was getting 10 to 20 times his regular viewer numbers. It was a success for him. So it is almost unilaterally a good thing to have more people watching the event, however they may be doing that, whether that be on T90 stream or on Nilly's or Mems or even my little stream. So I think that's just something that people should consider when they think about those sorts of things. But obviously, I don't think I said anything disrespectful towards my fellow casters, and I certainly don't intend that because we're all friends and stuff, and yeah, people obviously try and fabricate drama when there really doesn't need to be. But I guess just going to wrap this up because I've already done way too much rambling, as always. Yeah, it's a new S-tier tournament, and I think that, I have no, inside information, but I would hope that there is a 2 pools 3. And it's a fun concept. I think it encourages a lot of variety, and it's nice. I think it was a more successful tournament in terms of providing entertaining and compelling matches than a tournament like World Cup 2v2, at least in my opinion. I thought that the games, there were more very memorable games and sets. And I know it's not the most important thing in terms of financials and stuff like that, but just as somebody who loves talking about Age of Empires, having a tournament provide really good quality games is very important to me, and 2 pools I think did a fairly good job of that. Obviously it has its issues, it has its hiccups, and no event is perfect. I'm sure Lida has learned a whole lot for future events, but obviously congrats to him and best of luck to him going forward. And that's going to wrap up this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to, leave a like and do all that stuff. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of comments on this video, so I don't think I need to worry too much about that. But of course, do subscribe to the channel for more AoE2 content. I do have, I'm going to be starting the Apronic campaign, custom campaign, very shortly. And I am, of course, going to be working on my campaign tier list series. So definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.